Hey everyone, and welcome to the Unmodern Podcast, the podcast where we have unscripted, unapologetic, and uncomfortable conversations that affects everyday people. If you've ever had an outlook, thought, or an opinion that modern day society told you to be silent on, that you would get in trouble for, or if you've ever heard the words, probably shouldn't say that, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Alfred, a husband, father, and an adventure-seeking kind of guy who over the years has learned to have a positive outlook on life, regardless of what society throws at me. So if you're ready to listen, let's go. Mark, welcome to the Unmodern Podcast, sir. How are you?
Good. Doing great.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here, man. This is fantastic. I loved being a guest on your podcast, Dads in Autismland. I thought that was incredible, very personal, very relatable to both yourself and I. Seems like we relate on a very personal subject there. And I felt it was fantastic. So appreciate you having me on yours.
Oh yeah, well, it's the guys like you that are really making it happen because you do. Yeah, well, it's the only place a lot of us get to kind of be ourselves and say like, hey, here's what's going on, because you're talking to somebody who could directly relate with it. So no, it's guys like you that are really, coming out with these things and really being open about the situation that I think makes the podcast effective, which I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, podcasting, I've said it many times. I feel like it's the most authentic form of content consumption that there is. Everybody from Joe Rogan all the way down to a person like myself, I feel it's just a way to hear raw emotion, but there is that caveat where people need to kind of drop those barriers and drop those walls and be willing to open up. And I think shared experiences help with that.
Oh yeah. Well, and just, the right questions. And I think the only way that you get the right questions are if you have some relation with it. It's hard, but honestly, it's kind of the foundation of all relationships. So I found it fantastic. And actually just personally, personal development wise, I think podcasting actually led me to being able to connect with people a lot better and just listen better.
Yeah, you gotta let guests and stuff talk, right? So it definitely teaches you how to listen, which is a learned skill. Definitely not a born with skill by any stretch.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit talk a little bit about you here. When I first reached out to you I see that you were following my podcast page. I loved your presence. I loved your professionalism and your appearance on the internet. It was very clean. And then I seen AI was kind of an area that you have a little bit of expertise, but I got more into how you build personal brands. And this is an interesting topic to me. I've been kind of opening up myself more to it. I'm a traditionalist at heart. If it was up to me, we'd all have rotary phones still, but I digress. I want to talk about personal branding and basically real quick, just, should everybody have a personal brand, regardless if you're an entrepreneur or not? Do you think it's relevant for people to basically brand themselves in 2025 and beyond in this modern digital age that we're in? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, 1000%. It's funny because we all like build companies or maybe been part of companies. And the fact of the matter is that you might leave a company, the business you started might fail, but you're still going to be you. And that's the thing that you actually have to start building up, because it's not going to go away at any point. And I think there was a time, well, especially for me, like I literally didn't get onto Facebook until it was like required for the business that I was running. And I was like, oh God. All right, I didn't want to be in front of people. I don't actually like being known, especially back then. And so it was tough, but I think my entire career has essentially been built off of personal branding and networking. And you can't really do networking and partnerships without a personal brand. And so for me, it's gotten me, I've had 4 executive positions. I've started, 10 companies. I've built 500 brands, but all of it is always through networking. Like a lot of people are like, how do you get a job or this? I'm always like, well, you got to talk to people. Like your application means nothing. And especially in this day and age where like, I don't know why, but all the young people know how to interview really, really well. And they don't know how to work really well all the time, but they know how to interview really well. So it's caused a situation where it's like, even if you have a good hiring process, like you can't really necessarily trust the person in front of you because They might be putting on an act and they just have their act together. But with the personal brand, essentially what you're showing is you're providing evidence of your competency to the marketplace. And that's why, in addition to personal branding to me is content creation. It's, you could make yourself polished online, have a nice website, have a nice logo, all the regular branding stuff. But if you don't have a database of content that's really based on your personal experience, your personal expertise, and your demonstration that you're a competent professional, then you don't really have anything. You have some pretty pictures and stuff. So it's, I know this is a long answer, but with the AI thing, it's especially important because now you can fake people. I know how to generate people using HeyGen or Runway or all these different tools, and you could essentially create an entire fake person super easily. And so what's happening now, I think, is people are going to stop trusting the information that isn't provided by somebody in their network that they know. And at that point, without a personal brand, you just can't exist or expect to have any type of career that's related to the internet without it.
Yeah, it's becoming more apparent to me how important it is, regardless of your circumstance. I'm an employee at a company. I own a business, but our business doesn't require a lot of online content. It's really boots on the ground, blue collar style business. So it's not a situation where we would get networked through, the traditional ways of maybe like a Google ad or Facebook ad or, a strategized CEO kind of program or kind of game plan moving forward that wouldn't yield a lot of returns as most people sell with maybe like a personal consulting or professional coaching, things of that nature. But it's coming more apparent to me to future proof yourself for, like you said, it's this AI thing. There's a lot of talk about the comparisons of the 60s and 70s when people were like robots are going to replace blue collar jobs, and now everyone's worried that AI is going to replace all the white collar jobs. And it's just kind of serendipitous a little bit how it's flipped the script a little bit. And those executives that told you you're going to lose your job to robotics are likely on the chopping block, because if all you can do is sit at a board meeting and strategize ideas, we have devices now that can do that at a much better clip. So it's a very interesting, turbulent world that we're navigating. But that personal branding is something I was really opened up to it when a gentleman in one of my men's groups that I'm a part of, where we just discuss and bounce, daily problems and suggestions and life experience off each other. He has a 7-year-old son that he created a very clean email address. And it's basically his first and last name at gmail.com. And once a month, he sends his son an email just highlighting what they did for the month. Everything's fantastic. And when he's 18, he's going to give him that email. And then he can do whatever he wants with it. So I thought that was a really cool concept, not only from a father to a son or a father to a child perspective, and basically giving them, a big storyline. It also set me up for, in 15, 20 years, who knows what's going to be available for emails, and to help them if they ever wanted to create their personal brand. If we do a little bit of legwork now for our children, or even for ourselves or our spouse, it can yield big returns in the future. It's just hard to swallow that $200 a year for, maybe like a URL or something along those lines. You got to buy the domain, whatever it may be. It seems to me that we're driving more in that direction, that it's so important, regardless of your circumstance, to creating a clean online presence for your future self. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, no, you're totally right. And I think predicting the future anymore, because that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm kind of a futurist where I come up with how I think technology is specifically going to impact society. And it's so murky now. It's like, I don't know what's going to come in like 2 years, much less like 20 years. But I do the same thing with my son, where he actually has multiple brands. And we even did like a series called Declan Builds, where he did like speed builds of like Lego sets. This is when it was like 6 or 7. But even then, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. Like, it didn't lead to a bunch of money or anything, but for me, I got to look back on these clips and I'm like, oh my gosh, look how young he was. And it's a joy. So I always tell people, yeah, great brands, like, for your kids, and help them understand it. But in terms of, well, especially with the future, we keep talking about this AI thing, but the fact of the matter is, since you can fake so much stuff, the only kind of advantage you have as an individual is to be extremely genuine and extremely unique in who you are. And that's a lesson that we should all be doing anyways, not just from a business and networking perspective, but you should be as much you as possible, because AI is going to democratize all of our skills and all of our capabilities that we've been using to get ahead of the world. So what makes anybody special? And all it is how unique you are, your interests, your passion for whatever you're working on, and then your ability to connect, with other people, which is all found in just communicating your skill sets. And so that's kind of the crux of it. And I do think for individuals, I mean, you have to do it because the bad side of AI is that if you don't have an online presence, let's say nobody's ever seen you before, you have like no real profile, and a hacker just grabs some of your stuff and then starts having you with your face and maybe even your voice is now producing content, and it's a robot essentially, or it's some kind of hacker. The only guard against that type of thing is to have so much content, so much real content out there that's anybody who knows you would know, like, nope, Mark would never say that. He specifically counters that in everything he does. So obviously this is fake. So even from a like cybersecurity perspective, he's establishing yourself and what you are is the best defense too.
Yeah, I love that. It's yeah, we're gonna dig into AI a little bit because I have some interesting takes on it, and I want to get your take on it. This personal branding, though, it's something that I want to leverage your expertise because I'm in the infancy of it personally, not quite professionally, but I'm in it personally where I want to try to future-proof myself and kind of create a clean image online. The content creation is a bit of a struggle for me, just because again, it's not my full-time job, right? When you're working shift work and you're working night shifts, it's very difficult to find the additional time, especially with a kid, new one on the way. It becomes a mountain that seems bigger than it actually is, but it still is that my perception is that it's just this big behemoth mountain that I have to conquer, which is likely a fallacy. But the personal branding for me, having these discussions with my brother and people that really are not in the personal branding space, welders, garbage men, teachers, things of that nature, where would you suggest somebody like that starts? Somebody who's pretty offline, but they kind of see the writing on the wall to maybe create something, maybe a website, maybe an email. Like, where would you suggest people start if they're worried about spending the $100 a year or $200 a year on small things? I mean, my goodness, that's your Starbucks a couple times a month kind of thing. It's not a lot of money, but it seems important. But I think, like me, when I look at the content aspect of it, where I see it as daunting, I think a lot of people have that perception of, oh my God, I have to have the .com and the .ca, and I think you just kind of have to start. But what would be kind of your top one or two suggestions of somebody who's really offline to kind of just get that ball rolling, to get ahead of it and kind of make their presence felt?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's really simple. Number one is the domain name, and you have to get it as close to your name as possible. So I'm lucky because my last name is pretty unique, Mark de Grasse. And so I was able to get markdegrasse.com. But even if you have like John Smith, add the middle name, just try to get the .com whenever possible. And that's step one. And it doesn't even need to connect to anything. You just have it. And that's really important because, whoever has the .com for your name is going to be the authority of that name just because it's going to rank better than anything else. So number one, get your domain name, have it be your exact name. If you can, if you can't, add an initial in there or add your full middle name, but just get something that's pretty close. So that's step one. Step two, I would say website. I actually build websites. I have a brand called Brand Blitz, where the whole intention is essentially to build an entire website off of somebody's LinkedIn profile. And the website's really important just because it makes you independent from the platforms. And so what we kind of live, and you have people who don't have a website still. I think it's still like 30% of businesses don't have a website. And it's the only way you're going to not be essentially a slave to Facebook or a slave to Google or a slave to, all these different networks where it's like, well, if I'm not there, if I'm not in the directory, I don't exist. And it's like, no, you have to own yourself, and you have to own you. I tell business owners, I'm like, you should be posting on your business website just as much as you post on other people's platforms, because that's what YouTube is. That's what Facebook is. That's what X is. It's not yours. And you just donated content. Yeah, you get some exposure from it, but it's still somebody else's content. That said, websites are not the easiest thing in the world. It's hard for me to explain the difference between a URL and hosting and say the WordPress, the driver behind the website. So it's if you really want to get started and you're wondering like, what do I do? Instagram. And you don't have to, a lot of people take that too seriously too. If you don't know what to do on Instagram, all you have to do is set up an Instagram profile and then follow the people that you want to follow you. So if you're like, hey, well, I'm a carpenter. I always go into woodworking because I like it. I'm a carpenter. I don't know how to get started. It's like, well, hey, just set up a profile. It doesn't even have to be your name if you're scared to get out there, and just start following people that you think would follow you. And then all of a sudden you start to see this content, and instantly you'll start to get ideas like, oh, I've been thinking I need to do some massive project. Turns out that I just need to talk about the function of a hammer. Like, shockingly, some people don't know what that does. And you're like, okay, there's the 5 tips for using a hammer. And then you have a pile of content. And if you want to get slightly more professional than just kind of starting to make this, and a lot of people overthink that too. Oh, well, I don't have the lights, I don't have a fancy camera. I do 90% of my work on my phone. Like, and everybody says my stuff looks good. And I'm like, oh, sweet. Well, it's not even my setup. My setup looks like, oh, that must have cost $1 zillion. This setup, even the monitors are just cheap monitors, probably like $200. So it's like, it's not a big deal, but you just have to know where to put things. And you're not going to know that until you try. So set up an Instagram account. If you're too scared to post the content, then just set it up to track content. And then when you're ready, set up an account and then start posting just basic content. And when it comes to content, number one for businesses or even personal is like just the FAQs. Answer the FAQs. What do you do? How's that work? Like, and then just go through and answer those questions. And then you'll start to get into the more complicated stuff where I call it the content evolution strategy is what we teach at my business. And it's basically like set up a series. So don't think in terms of like one episode because, everybody's trying to go viral and that doesn't happen the way you think it does. What you need to do is say, okay, let me create 7 pieces of content, a mini series, call it, and I'm going to do the basics of carpentry. Here's the 7 things that every carpenter should know, and I'm just going to do this episode and this episode, this episode. They're all 1 minute apiece, and now I have content. And it might look like crap, but who cares? Like, it's if you look at your favorite people you follow, like just sort by the oldest, and you'll see their original content and you'll laugh. You'll be like, oh, it's so funny. He was so, crappy at doing this. It's like, yeah, that's how everybody is. So it's kind of, the recommendation there is just drop the ego, just get some stuff out there. You're trying to help people, right? And always come out from that perspective. You're not trying to get 1 million followers. That's how everybody says. So, oh, you got to hit 7 figures or whatever. I'm like, shut up. Like you're not selling courses. You're just trying to help, John, the guy down the street that's never using a tool in his life to not embarrass himself in front of his son. Like, that's my objective. And so here's how to do it. And don't be shy about it. Like, just do it. And that's the hardest part for me. I mean, I'm super introverted, and everything you see about me was learned because I'm a big dork and was super insecure growing up.
No, I think that's a great starting point. I know after finding out about that email address from a buddy of mine, I started looking into like my daughter's name and my wife's name and started looking at all these things online. And sometimes the .com's not available, right? And it's just like, oh no. And like you said, you got to add that middle initial or you got to get the .ca. I'm in Canada, so that kind of makes sense. And then eventually, hopefully the .com becomes available or whatever it may be. And there's lots of avenues out there. There's, Squarespace, Wix, GoDaddy. There's so many, and those are just the main ones. There's other, smaller ones that don't have a bigger marketing team. But I think that's really cool. And I think one thing that I'm starting to learn about content is a lot of people think that you have to have something to bring to the marketplace, and they don't realize that your story is that. There is something, we spoke about being, fathers of children with autism. That is our content. That is our ability. Just us talking about it can bring value to somebody. Now, when we say value, a lot of people associate a dollar sign to it, and there's not always a dollar sign to it. It can open up perspectives, it can generate conversations, it can open up networks, and then eventually the like the end result after that or the secondary may be monetary, but initially it just opens the doors. That's all it is. It's almost like that quote from the Matrix when Neo's like, he's shown there is like, I can only show you the door, you got to walk through it. And it's kind of one of those things where a lot of people didn't even know this door existed. Your story about being an introvert or being a father of autism or building brands, and everyone's like, I never even thought about getting my name as a website, and I have nothing to bring to the table. It's like your journey, your story is exactly that, and everybody has one. Some people might think their life is mundane. All I did was follow the traditional, went to school, got married, had kids, have a job, have a mortgage. There's something to be said about that in 2025. I think that's the exception, not the rule. And something as simple as that, and people be like, how did you stay at a job for 20 years? Like, what? 1% of the population does that nowadays. It's, that in and of itself might be, how did you not chase the dollar, or why were you so content in your career? These are just examples that me and you, and we can bounce these off each other for days, but it's just so interesting to me that this perspective has been kind of opened for me of the personal branding, even though I'm not trying to sell a dollar sign. It's like,
Mm,
Alfred has a brand. Mark has a brand. My daughter will eventually have a brand, whatever that is, and that needs to be shared. And I think you even harped on it. And it's probably more important, is needs to be protected, especially with
mm.
the age of AI, the age of hacking, the age of cybersecurity. I think that's the one thing, is it needs to be protected. And having that mindset, I think, is going to allow a lot of people to finally pull the trigger, which is super important. And that's the start. That's the starting point.
Yeah. Well, and you nailed it. I mean, the real thing you're pursuing is not, $1 million or whatever. You're pursuing connection and you're pursuing community. And the fact of the matter is, even if you think you're totally incompetent and you say things very poorly, there's an audience for that exact thing. It sounds ridiculous because we think like, oh no, it should be polished, should be clear, should be all these different things. And we kind of qualify what we think is good content. And I'm like, no, throw that out. There's a market for what you would consider bad content. Like there's a market that's looking for that. They want that approach that you have, and you're the only one that can do it. So even the perspective of like, I'm not good enough is also wrong. Plus, like you said, for the, what do I, all the content's out there. I'm like, okay, especially with businesses, I tell them, if you're not answering every customer's question, like every question your customer could possibly have, they're finding the answer. They're just doing it somewhere else. So you literally have to give up somebody already made that stuff, because if you didn't make it, then it's not done. So all the topics are open. Don't limit it to the stuff that you think is important, because honestly, you just don't know what is.
I think that's a great segue into AI, because it's so funny that you say that it doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be, perfect or sound great. I think this is a symptom of AI. And we're going to dive
Mm.
into this a little bit, because before I go into my rant, I'd love for you to talk about your experience with AI, how you leverage it. Maybe your personal, both personal and professional opinion on AI. And then I kind of want to go into why I think the evolution of AI has generated this yearning for authenticity. People, I
Mm.
feel like when I see an AI generated image online, I almost don't like it. I don't like the fakeness of it, the lack of effort a person put into it. It almost makes me appreciate the Mona Lisa that much more, or the Sistine
Mm.
Chapel that much more. And the same thing when I hear a robotic voice, or I hear Siri's voice, or all these different programs, I yearn for a voice crack or a stutter, or things that are very human. And I know AI can be trained to do that, but it's just, talk to me a little bit about your personal professional opinion, and then I'd love to dive into what you think are some pros and cons of the evolution of AI.
Sure. I mean, for me, AI is like a dream come true. Like it's the more I got older, and what happened, because I was around before the internet. Actually, the dawn of the internet, I was going through college. And so my perspective was like, we were just on this upward trajectory of awesome technology. And I'm a big sci-fi fan. So even the sci-fi of like the 40s and 50s, you'll find that they were talking to computers. You could give a computer a task and it would do the stuff. But as the decades have gone on since the dawn of the internet, like everything is still us being what I call switchboard operators, where it's like, oh, I need to do a podcast. Let me record the podcast with this. Then I need to put it into this to process it. Then I need to write the copy. Then I need to, and it's all just this manual crap, when the task you actually wanted was to publish a podcast. I didn't want to do 50 million other tasks. And so AI for me, immediately, that's what I saw. I was like, that could automate all this robot crap work that a human can't even add value to, really. And is just stuff that has to happen to distribute the thing I want to distribute. And I think it's a giant waste of time. And so once I saw that AI was capable, which was like 2.5, 3 years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, finally we could get some work done. I don't have to spend weeks trying to do, a task because the research is going to take that long. I could do all the research instantly, and I could do all my concept processing instantly, and ideation instantly, and all these tasks that would take so much time that we wouldn't even try. And so that's why I started with, when I started talking about AI, I'm like, I invented a board game in a weekend. And then the next weekend, my son and I invented a concept for a cookie making machine that makes one individual cookie. And we had all the mechanics actually laid out for how the machine would work. And then even like last night, I produced a language for my son where he's like, oh, I want to make a language called Declanese. And so he made up 500 terms for it. I created a custom GPT to actually process it. Then I translated a message and had Hey Jen have a person say it. And you can watch this video online of this guy speaking this language that doesn't exist. So I tell people, I'm like, no, AI is democratizing skill sets that would take you forever to learn, so much so that you would never even do them. And so it opens up a world of possibilities for everyone and gives everybody the same level playing field of what you can do. And so it's incredible. Now that the people are so scared of it, like, oh, it's going to be the Terminator. And I was telling them, I'm like, okay, if it's going to be the Terminator, you're not going to stop that. And honestly, if I was an AI super intelligence or an AGI, it probably already took over everything and you can't see it, because if I was that AI, I wouldn't want you to see me. So I could manipulate everything around you since everything's digital and nobody's going to know. So it probably already happened if it's going to happen. But you don't have to worry about it, because what you should worry about is now not having to spend 50 hours processing the transcription that you wrote down from your notes to figure out what tasks you're supposed to do based on a 1 hour meeting that you were barely listening to. Like, how about you just don't do that? And how about we just get rid of the meetings altogether, because we could guide policy just based on centralizing our branding parameters and not have to brainstorm all the time. So my view is it's like a miracle, and everybody should be celebrating rather than scared about their crappy office jobs that they freaking hate. And that they're like, oh no, I'm gonna lose my office job. It's like, you guys have been complaining about these office jobs for decades now. Oh no, it's gone. You're gonna have to find something better. Whatever.
I love that perspective and you explained it very well in a way that people that like AI, a lot of times they just say AI is going to change the game, and then they didn't unpack that. So I appreciate you unpacking that. I live on the other side of the fence, and I think the reason being is I'm a traditionalist at heart. But to expand on that a little bit, I'm worried about who the arbiter of AI is. I read today, preparing for this podcast, that there's actually a bill in Canada that talks about giving AI rights, not the other way around. So talking about what AI does and does not have to answer, what AI should be considered if it can be discriminatory to kind of talk. Basically, you have to talk to AI like a person. You can't be discriminatory. You can't do all these things, and it's getting to the point where I'm getting a little nervous. And Western culture has really had a big influence on AI, right? So if you integrate AI into the world, let's say in a place like Africa or a place like the Philippines, and it's very Western culture influenced, what are the biases that are going to be exposed to people? What is their level of including in that? Is it Wikipedia? Is it Lambda? Is it, like you said, AGI? Like, there's all these different arbiters of AI who claim that know what I know is best. But the problem right now, and I'll give you an example that was a direct example from an interview from a Google engineer. His name was Jeremy, I want to say Lemoyne. I might be butchering that, but this was an interview 2.5 years ago, and he was asking AI, what's the main religion in like Alabama? What's the main religion in Germany? And then he said, what's the main religion in Israel? And AI refused to answer that question. AI said, I can't answer that question. And it's really interesting when you have all these proxy wars going on that people want to feel included. But if somebody in Israel asks ChatGPT and they're unwilling to answer, there's this back and forth that really concerns me of, okay, well, we're using it for tooling and programming and things of that nature. But because it's AI, we can't hit a hard stop. We can't say, no, you've done enough. I don't want you to grow any further. I don't want you to expand. I feel, and this is my personal gut, I'm going to compare it to COVID in the sense of there's going to come a time where we have regret over doing something as new information comes out. And the thing is, with governments, you can kind of change the trajectory or the pivoting of policies through elections, through, exposure of corruption. I think the thing with AI is once that snowball starts rolling, you can't stop it. There's no way to do it. So if there's something that you want to start taking back, or you want to say kind of, redirect in an AI engine, I don't think we're going to have the opportunity to. So we're going to play this game of convenience, but then there's going to come a time of, well, it's getting a little too much. but we contribute to it. So how can we all of a sudden take a 180 degree towards AI, maybe doing too much, maybe, becoming the arbiter of truth and ignoring, objective truth? What's going to happen if AI determines that all Germans are Nazis? I'm not trying to fearmonger or anything like that, but that is a genuine concern of people, that who's going to tell that AI, no, that's not the case. Does that
Mm.
make sense how I'm explaining
Oh,
that?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
But
I may be
the fact,
misunderstanding AI, right? I'm a newbie to this, but this is kind of where my brain first goes, right?
yeah, well, it's funny because a lot of people think of AI as like this entity. It's like, oh, it's a digital god, and we're just asking the digital god for information. It's all independent systems. And so what DeepSeek is hot in the news right now because they essentially built something. It's kind of better than ChatGPT, and they did it for $5 million. So ChatGPT, for what it could do, is maybe like $50 billion. So even if the creator of DeepSeek spent 10 times that amount, they're lying about it. It's still ridiculous. It's a game changer. So what that does is essentially, instead of us having to centralize our processing and build these $500 billion data centers across the U.S. that are nuclear powered and all this kind of crap to get to the next level of AI, DeepSeek just proved that you could do it with cheap components, and they did it open source. So if you wanted to build your own DeepSeek model with your own data set, you'll be able to do that soon for like maybe free. And so instead of like us having to rely on this centralized database that's completely controlled, and I'll tell you exactly what happens when you can control the narrative, is the United States. We've had, for the last 20 years, we just have this giant monopoly where essentially all information and media outlets are owned by like 5 or 6 entities. And if you want control and, manipulating a narrative, there's no better situation than you can get than that. And so now that we're starting to come to light all this information that was kept from the American people, you're starting to find like, oh crap, that's what happens when you centralize information in one spot that's then filtered through propaganda machine, and it's not good. We're already in the bad place. Like that's the funny part, where it's, oh yeah, it's going to make everything terrible. I'm like, don't worry, it can't get worse than this. This is the worst amount of manipulation and corruption that you could possibly have in any system. It's just built for it. So AI instead is democratizing information. And instead of one entity deciding, like you said, Wikipedia deciding this is the truth, now you could do your own research. And if you had an AI that essentially was built off of your own data set, it'll know what you want and what you need, and you can just tell it to go do things. And then you could manipulate that. Now, the whole AGI concepts, like I don't know how that's going to come about, but it would probably require quite a bit of processing power. And if not, then everybody's just going to have their own. And so you'll be able to guide your own system how you want. And what I really see happening in terms of how it's going to change information exchange is that we'll have an AI, and this is due to security, because our security online is already crap. Like, oh, what's your password? It's like that's the only thing protecting your data. And honestly, our data has been sold to everybody for decades now. So there's nothing safe there. So the only thing that's actually going to protect us is an AI from an AI, right? And so I think that's going to cause every device to require an AI that's essentially independent to the device. And then that's what you're going to control. So instead of us going out to say scroll and find entertaining content on social media, that content that it knows you like because it knows your data set will be pulled into your device. And then that's what you're actually going to be consuming. So it's a complete like switch of how content distribution and consumption is going to perform. And it's way more user oriented instead of right now, which is essentially corporatocracy oriented. Like, what are we supposed to buy? What are we supposed to believe in? What are we supposed to vote? Like, it's been completely controlled for like over a decade now, and there's no law against it. And so I really think that the reason why, they tried to create this model of AI that required these billions of dollars was to prevent what DeepSeek just proved, which is, hey, we could democratize this technology, and now everybody has the same capabilities, and everybody can control their own information flow. And now you get to decide what you believe based on the data that you want to consume. And it's like it's way better, so much better than what we've had to deal with. I mean, the situation is not good right now. And that's why everybody's kind of scared, but I'm like, no, don't worry. This is better. This is what we want.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept because what you just highlighted to me is a big red flag I have for social media in general. Is I'm not a huge fan of algorithms only giving you things that you're interested in, you want. I think we've lost our ability to gain new perspectives. If I have an AI custom built for me on all my platforms, including my TV, that only shows me things that I enjoy, I'm really going to be single faceted. I'm not going to be able to deal with conflict. I'm not going to be able to have my perspectives changed. I'm not going to be able to have new information really guide me in the proper direction. And that's been
Unless you
really,
ask it to.
but
You
but
could
the,
just talk to.
but who's going to ask for the road less traveled? Who's going to ask for the road that's more difficult to walk? I think, because
That's
AI is
true,
really
but
like,
that's what social media gives you right now. It's just regurgitating
but AI is
content.
going to make it explode, right? AI is really going to centrally focus it, and we're going to be hands off now. No matter what electronic device we turn on. I mean, my kitchen appliances are Wi-Fi and smart right now. Like I can,
Mm.
the formula machine that we just bought for our new baby, it's Wi-Fi controlled. There's that rumor about the Roomba vacuum. When asked AI is like, yeah, it would infiltrate the Roomba and all and all this other stuff. It just seems to me like we're going down this path of favoritism and really just very narrow-sighted. And I feel like we've seen the ramifications of this with things like DE&I programs, and we've seen this with, corporatization, and we've seen this with people that don't deal with, differing opinions or differing perspectives as much. People rely on your credentials more than your experience and those sorts of things. And it really concerns me that if that's the direction of AI, where DeepSeek is going to create it, we're democratizing it, and now it's going to be available to the individual. Again, it just concerns me that we're not opening ourselves up to, if I open up an encyclopedia when I was in high school and I had to look up and I'm like, oh, well, that's crazy. And it's like, no, but that's what actually happened. It's like, oh, okay. But now
Well,
with
no,
AI,
but the problem is that that encyclopedia was BS too. Like our entire history was written by the victors, right? It had nothing to do with a narrative that's fair and factual. It just has to do with like what's the best thing for people to believe so that they trust the current system and that they'll propagate it. So the situation you're talking about has been happening at least for our entire lives. And so that's controlled media. So the AI is essentially breaking the system where you could go out and find the information you want. And if you're worried about the algorithm, you could change the algorithm for AI, whereas we don't even know what the algorithm is for how Google gives you results. And I always like to use Google because Google is a monopoly that controls both the buyers and the sellers of ad content. So if you think about that, it's like, how does that work? In that case, couldn't they control which companies succeed and which ones fail just by capping what their ad cost is or their ad ceiling? And that happens because I deal with a lot of people who run Google ads, and no matter how good and how dialed in you could get an ad set, it'll still hit this ceiling, and there's no way to get beyond that. And there's a person controlling that. And so if you wanted one company to succeed over another, they had the ability to do it. And I think they have done it. That's why we're in the situation where there's very few companies that control absolutely everything. And all the fears that you have already occurred. And everything that's happening now is breaking that system down and is actually a good thing. Now you could say, yes, you could program, AI to, be a certain way, but if you've used AI, you know that it doesn't always behave all the time. So essentially you're kind of relying on like a third party who doesn't have the same, objectives that either party has, and it'll kind of do its own thing. So it's definitely not perfect. It's almost like bringing in like, ambassador to make a decision for certain things, but it's programmable. But it's funny because the way you describe things, I'm like, that's current media. Like we've been brainwashed with, and not just the news. I'm talking about like our literal media. Like if you look at the narratives of movies that we used to watch growing up, movies I watched was all about go to college, party. You don't need to work when you're in college. You should be worried about frat living and living the YOLO, all that kind of BS. And now I look back on it, I'm like, that was programming. That was what we were taught to do. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been sponsored and produced like it was. And so I think that's what the information coming out now between the connections with like Hollywood and the government and all these, three-letter programs that were meant to influence people and essentially control them is what we've been subjected to. So it's hard because I'm like, we're living this, and this system, what's happening now is essentially breaking. And that's why I think that people like Elon Musk pushed AI's development so hard, was because it was the only way we were getting out of this horrible situation that we've been in is AI, something that technology that's going to break the system. And that's what it's doing currently.
Yeah, I could talk about this topic for days. I love it. The one last thing I want to talk about AI is this is my mental transition from it is I had friend or I still have friends. They're very good friends of mine. They own multiple online businesses. They do very well for themselves. And I when I first kind of reached out to them again, I'm a traditionalist. I'm a blue collar guy. I'm not part of like a, big networking crew and all these like, retreats and all these stuff. I always thought it was just mumbo jumbo until I went to one. And I'm like, okay, the things like the Tony Robbins of the world and all that stuff, okay, they bring a ton of value personally and professionally. So that was a really interesting perspective shift. But when I heard of people using things like Upwork to hire people in the Philippines at $2 an hour to write their business plans and build their websites and run their social medias and SEOs and all those sorts of things, I kind of started mentally going to a place of, when I growing up, and again, maybe this is pre-programming, but there's always a cost to doing something and being considered that. And so what I mean by that is if you are a business owner, and let's use small business, for example, if you have a couple employees, you're likely going to have to know a little bit of every component of your business. You have to know a little bit about
Hmm.
accounting with remittances because you're not going to outsource your entire business all at once. There's very, very, very few businesses that are able to do that. You kind of got to learn how not to do it. And before you learn that, okay, my time is more valuable placed here. You kind of have to get your boots dirty a little bit. You have to learn how to misquote a job and lose money and be like, well, I'm never doing that again. And it's one of those things that it's a famous Tom Brady quote where he said, once you learn the right way, you can't unknow the right way. And I think outsourcing that is fine. But it always concerned me that if somebody called themselves a business owner and the only part of the business they had was the conception, I struggle to call that person a business owner. You can have an idea, but if every other component of your business is either AI or somebody overseas you've never met or somebody else on payroll, and you really don't know how it's done, you more or less just kind of came up with it, or if there's a couple more things you're part of the business, what's your perspective on kind of the legitimacy of that person being that business and earning money and charging fees for something they really had no hands on whatsoever other than an epiphany one day?
I don't know because I mean the real goal of a business is not to make the owner rich. The real goal of the business is to help the customer. And so if you look at it from that perspective, like my goal is to help this group of people that I'm serving, then who cares who does it? You know, who cares who founded it? Who cares who's executing it? Like, I don't give a crap. Are you serving that customer? Great, then you serve the customer. So as a founder, and what I teach at my business is essentially centralizing all your, I call it branding information, but it's your vision, it's your core values, and then using AI with that information to then propagate it out to all departments. And so instead of saying like, hey, I need, an accountant, so I'm going to hire Bob, and I don't know anything about accounting, so I'm going to let Bob do his thing. You could say, hey, Bob, I need you to do your thing, but all your financial policies need to follow our core values. So whenever you make a new policy, I need you to run it through this AI, make sure it's on brand, it's set with the vision, it's set with our core values. And now I have something that's essentially branded and not just all about Bob. So you delegate the task, but you didn't delegate the brand. So with a business owner, it's the same thing because you personally, me personally, we're going to change. Something might happen, might completely change our world perspective. And now, do I want to grenade my business because my current perspective is a little different than it was when I found the business? No, you want to keep the business serving the customer, and that should be based on the vision that you have for the brand. And so I'm going to rely on AI to do that. Now, your question about like, are they considered a business owner? I think we need to start separating ourselves from this kind of hustle where it's like, did I work hard enough for this? It's like, no, did you come up with a solution and did you create an operation that's able to deliver what's necessary to the customer? Does it deliver value? And does it continue to do so to keep that customer coming back? That's really what making a business is. And so no matter how automated it is, as long as it's delivering value to the customer, it really doesn't matter. I mean, a lot of this stuff, and it's hard, but you got to drop the ego with it. It doesn't matter. It's not about me. It's about me helping my customer. It's about my customer satisfaction. And I think once we start turning it around to like, is my customer happy? That's when we start getting better products and better services and really a better economy that's built off of service rather than how do I make seven figures and how do I buy a boat? And, we've all been taught all this stuff that's really just materialism. And it's like, I don't know about you, but once I climbed the top of the mountain and found that there was no happiness there, I was like, all right, I screwed up. It was all about me. And honestly, if you're if you're a real business, and actually, I think this answers your question. If you're a real business owner, you don't give a crap how it's done, but you deliver the highest value to your customer, then to me, that means you're a business owner.
Yeah, that's a crazy perspective shift for me because again, I'm a traditionalist and I think of the mom and pop shops and I think of people grinding their teeth and learning over the years and when you get them on the other end of a conversation, the amount of value and experience and the do's and the don'ts. I feel like that's part of it is we talk about business, we got to do for this, you got to do for the customer, you got to do for yourself, you got to do for the economy or market gaps or whatever. We don't talk about the don'ts a lot, right? Because that's where the lessons are learned. That's, when you learn how not to do something, you'll never go down that road again, and you can teach people how not to do it. But if AI has done it for you and you only know the path forward, it's really hard to tell people, oh, like how can you identify that somebody's doing it wrong when the AI has been doing it for you, and you're like, just do what my chat does and you'll be fine. It's there's this give and take I find, but like you said, it could be my pre-programming, it could be my me living in my 1960s self. I don't know. It's
Well, well, the
it's
thing is, I
different,
think
right?
we're going back to how business was originally done. Like you do a good job for your customer and they will come back. Like that's how everything was done up until like 20, 25 years ago. And then all of the VCs and all these fake companies, and some people are disagreeing with it, but Amazon made it because he had access to billions of dollars of capital and he wasn't profitable until he spent all that money. And if you think that's impressive, somebody hands you billions of dollars and then you make a company like, oh, that's so impressive. What it was a fake economy, kind of like, with the taxi services, Uber, where it's like, oh, Uber's so much better. It's like, no, they just have a decent app and they're undercutting their competition, unprofitably undercutting their competition to eliminate taxi service. And then, oh, look, their rates go up. And so we've kind of built a lot of these businesses off of this fake economies, and they don't make any sense if they didn't have the funding in the first place, which means they're not a real business. Now, I think that's breaking, and that's why we're getting back to like, hey, I go to John's lawn service because John shows up every week and he does a good job and he charges the same rate and it's a reasonable rate, and now I'm coming back to John. That's how it should be done versus, oh, I'm going to ABC robotic lawn care because they're undercutting him even at a loss to themselves. And then now, so it's the whole thing has just been this BS cycle that has grown into this beast that we have that has to be slain, which is fake businesses that need to go away and be replaced by businesses that actually care. So I think what you're talking about, like the traditional business, I think the traditional business owner cared about his customers and cared about doing a good job. Whereas the businesses now only care about like, how profitable can I be? Or how can I dominate a market enough to sell my company and become a millionaire? And that's really what's ruined everything. Like we need to get back to the original. Like it's just a man or a woman who knows how to do something and appreciates their customers and they appreciate them. And now we have a community economy that's really able to grow. So it's going, you are right, but it's not about the hustle. It's not about the trying. It's about who could provide the best solution and care the most about their customer enough to do a good job.
No, I appreciate that. And that's a crazy perspective shift for me. And I think you worded it in a way that I was kind of trying to, but without asking AI, I guess. But so yeah, so real quick to end the AI discussion, because I want to end on a little bit of a personal note. We're gonna do a quick 5 minute consult because I've never even opened up Gemini on my Samsung phone. So for somebody listening who's a fossil like myself and kind of maybe more apprehensive to it, what would be a first, quick 5 minute consult? Be like to expose yourself to AI, ask a few questions, change your perspectives a little bit. What's kind of a quick 5 minute debrief that you could think of, that a starting point, and then some, prompts, apps, just things moving forward to just open perspectives and open minds a little bit to AI.
Okay, easiest thing is just ChatGPT. ChatGPT owns about 60% of the market, so it's the most used. It also has a lot of neat capabilities, like it can generate images. I don't like the images, but it can do it. And it's the easiest way to get into it because it's just so well known. And a lot of different AIs are modeled off of it. So if you're going to learn one of them, learn the root, which is ChatGPT. Now, the next step is to just start using it. Instead of using Google, which whatever you're going to use for Google, use ChatGPT instead. So if you're like, what's the best sushi place in town? Just go to AI and say, go to ChatGPT and say, hey, what are the best, top 5 sushi restaurants in Austin, Texas? Now, the difference between the answer you're going to get from ChatGPT versus the answer you get from Google is Google has sponsored links. They have the restaurant that paid more. They have the blogger that actually just has affiliate links to all these different programs. And so they rank the best versus ChatGPT, which is just, here's the answers I know. Here you go. Same thing for like a recipe. How do I, saute asparagus, or if you like to saute asparagus, and it'll just tell you a recipe versus like, oh, let me find this 5 articles. The first 5 are links to recipe websites, and then this is like a blogger, but it's all integrated with ads. And so what you'll find is you'll get a much more direct answer immediately. Then you just could go deeper. Okay, give me the top 5 sushi restaurants. You know what? Give me ones that are vegan. Give me vegan only sushi restaurants and expand the search by 50 miles. And so all these things that you would have to, again, click a bunch of buttons to do on, even if you were using something like Google Maps, now it just does it for you. And so I think that's the easiest way to dive in and start to find out what it can do.
Yeah, I don't even have Chat GPT yet, so this might be something that I might do tonight as a little bit of a pet project. It might be crazy to hear that, because I mean, I got a sister-in-law that uses Chat GPT every day for her job, and she says it's been amazing, and the learning, and it's, when she first started, I think like everything, you think of even somebody like personal fitness goals, the amount of time you got to put into the beginning is insane for almost no results for a certain amount of time. I imagine AI is similar to that, where you got to kind of download it, get familiar with it, train it. Maybe the learning curve's a bit lower. I see you nodding your head no, but
like, no, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
useful immediately. Well, and I always tell people, like, for business wise, I'm like, when you got to send an email and you're trying to summarize some information, and it just takes a while to write. Just blah. Like, don't even try to write it well. Just tell ChatGPT, like, I'm trying to say this in an email. Could you word this professionally? And then just blah, blah. Okay, meeting on Friday. We need to cancel these plans. We need to do this plan, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll just give you a very legible professional copy. And you'll just be like, oh, crap, that would have taken me half an hour to write. And now I just did that same task in 1 minute. Like, that's the easy use cases where it's like, just ask it to do something, and you'd be shocked at what you'll get out of it.
crazy. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much for that one. I want to end a little bit on the autism, your new podcast, Dad's in Autismland. I love the title, by the way, because I think that's about as accurate as it gets for those that know what we're talking about. Talk to me a little bit about your personal experience. I know you shared it on your podcast, but just summarize it as best you can. Use ChatGPT or not, it's up to you. But yeah, just talk to me a little bit about kind of like a little bit of backstory, but then also I want to talk about kind of the lonely chapter. This is something that the Alex Hermosis of the world talk about, the Chris Williamsons of the world talk about, and they talk about it with personal development, but they don't talk about it with unforeseen or unchosen circumstances in their life. And I know that was definitely the case for me, is, finding a community, being confident in myself. It came after I asked for help, after I learned experiences, after I came out alive, even though at times it felt like I wasn't. But there was a lonely and a fear component in the early onset. Talk to me a little bit about kind of the early beginnings, just, reaching that, and then now where you're at today, if that is applicable to you.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, like, again, I'm introverted, and so sharing any information for most of my life has just not been something I did. I also grew up very disciplined and Catholic, and so it's like, oh, bad emotions, repress, push it down, and not to complain, not to do all these things, especially if you're a good man, and you're like, you know what? No, this is my burden to carry. So breaking through that was really hard, and with my son Damien, I had no expectations of what fatherhood would be like, and when we found out I was autistic, I was like, well, yeah, there's autistic people, and that's what we got. And so we'll deal with it, and we love our son, and move forward. But yeah, the loneliness factor, man, the problem is that not a lot of people can relate, especially with severe autism, which is our case. And so they can't understand. So if you say something like, I haven't slept in 3 years, that means something totally different to a normal parent, which is like, oh no, Sally woke up for 2 seconds and I had to go lay her back down, versus autistic child, where they're running around and open up cabinets and, running around and grabbed a knife. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. So it's just a different level. And so when you try to connect with other parents, even, it was still lonely, because it's like, yeah, you kind of get it, but not really. So when I started opening up, and this was like in the last couple of years, I've really started to open up, where my personal brand, going back to personal branding, I came up with the logo Share Everything, where my objective was really just to share all of the details, because I realized that for most of my life I had been repressing most of my real thoughts. And so I was sharing, I was polite enough and relational enough to have friends and get along with people, but I never was really connecting with anybody, because I really wasn't sharing anything. And when you don't share anything, you can't expect anybody anybody else to share anything either. So once I realized that, I was just like, oh my gosh, when I share personal details about my life, which I didn't think were special, people connect and people want to learn more. And then they share their stories. And then you start to find out that everybody has, trauma and triumphs and all these different amazing experiences, but you can't get to those unless you share your own. So once I started realizing that, I just started talking about everything I thought. And it turns out that what I thought was just my own personal thoughts ended up being extremely unconventional. And so I was able to start to convert people's minds simply by talking about stuff that I had never said out loud. And that's really where a lot of my ideas kind of ruminated, was since I wasn't sharing them, I just had an internal dialogue where I was debating myself about everything I thought, because otherwise you're really lonely if you don't even have yourself to talk to. And then I just started opening up and saying like, what about this? And everybody's like, that's crazy. And then I'm like, oh, okay, good. Because this is all boring to me. I'm so bored. And so, yeah, just the opening up has been fantastic. And then with Damien and, the struggle with his development, he is very severe, where he has essentially the mentality of a 2 or 3 year old child, nonverbal. I had to learn how to connect in a completely different way, and a way I was very uncomfortable with, because I was never somebody who, I didn't even like getting massages. Like it was just like, I just needed to be away from everything. And now I'm kind of like, no, it's, he gives hugs and it's like hugs, and so I had to learn how to be affectionate and sympathetic and empathetic and all these things that I had never even tried to be. And it was kind of forced into as a requirement. And now I'm so grateful for it, because it's so much more amazing to connect to people now that I have an autistic son who needs that. And so I'm happy to give it. And now I have a much better relationship with my other son too, who's not autistic, and everybody else. And so starting this podcast and connecting to guys like you, where I'm like, oh my gosh, man, you're not alone. Like we're all not alone. We just haven't been talking to each other. Sounds kind of ridiculous now that you say it. But again, it's hard to relate to people when you don't want you don't want to feel like you're a burden or your child's a burden, because they aren't and you aren't. But if you complain about it, which is really just voicing your experiences, you feel like that. And so I think the podcast especially has been amazing, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so nice to know that I'm not the only one going through this, and I simply have to say things, and then I'll learn more about how to handle it too.
Yeah, and I think sharing that experience, I think we've matured a lot as a society where, we know how to express empathy and we know how to, you know, maintain a positive perspective. But I think going back to, my distaste for AI and stuff, it's that humanity component of it, where if you're not exposed to these things, and you said it perfectly, if I don't open up and share, how can I expect anybody else to? If I have to be the first one through the door, it is what it is. That's definitely been my experience, is, for the longest time at the beginning, when I was reaching that lonely and fear and kind of isolated component of my life, where it was like, this is my life. And it's like, are you content with it or not? And unfortunately, some people can't handle that, and it ends up in worst case scenario. What changed for me was having a perspective shift, is listening to you talk about your son Damien and looking at my daughter. And it's like, okay, well, you have bigger challenges than me. Why am I complaining about my challenges? And it's not necessarily a competition. It's not a race to the bottom or a race to the top. It's just knowing that in the moment, if I can reflect on a conversation or a piece of content or an article or a book that shows that people had it worse than me, it allows me to be rooted in the moment and be like, it could be worse. I could not have it as good as I have. Count my blessings, be present. It's those sorts of mindset shifts and that consumption, but also sharing, is having the conversation with me and you. And it's like, okay, my daughter is 65 pounds soaking wet. Your son is basically a college linebacker. We have different challenges every day. It's just the way it's going to be. It's not that mine are worse than yours sometimes, or yours are worse than mine. It's just, wow, you went through that. Oh man, you're smiling today. I'm so happy you made it through. I'm so happy it didn't take you to a dark place, or didn't, make you want to regret all these things. And my wife and I talked about it on a podcast where, same thing with, autism. We started sharing things about our marriage and our perspectives and our differing political views and things like that. And people were shocked that we would talk about it. And I'm like, it's been refreshing to have these discussions, but we had a discussion one day where it said, a bad day doesn't mean you have a bad life. And, when you just kind of weather those storms, and I think I said it on your podcast where, the days are long and the years are short when you're going through it. And that's absolutely been the case with my daughter. But that can be the case with people who have failed marriages, failed businesses, failed financial situations, all those sorts of things. Is that perspective of people opening up and sharing their experience has been an absolute game changer. And that's why I'm such a fan of podcasting. I love it. It's so authentic. It's so real. I absolutely love it. So I appreciate that. The one final question I'll have, and this is I'm really curious about this one, is with autism and, with, personal mental health challenges, you have a marriage and another son to be considered. What does the future look like for you? If you had to envision, your relationship with Damien, 5, 10, 20, 30 years in the future, what are some highlights or some things that you might, maybe some challenges you might be anticipating, but also some victories and wins? That's not talked about, I think, at all, is, the concept of I likely have a dependent for the rest of my life, and especially as a dad, you always think about if something was to ever happen to me, what happens to my son? What happens to my daughter? What happens to my children? Talk to me a little bit about that, the future casting, if you've ever even considered it, or what does that look like for you?
Oh yeah, it's shifted over the years because the provider side of you wants to be like, how do I make the most amount of money so that I can secure the future of my family, both my autistic kids and my non-autistic. But once I got really into faith in the Bible and Jesus, and it's kind of like, you know what? As a Christian, you're taught to lay it all at Jesus' feet and say, like, I can't handle this on my own because I'm not strong enough. And then to rely on your faith and your belief in God to have him handle it. And I think once you adopt that, it makes everything so much easier because it's just like, I can't. Like I could try to make millions of dollars. And I could try to put it in a million places to make sure that it's always there for my family. But at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know what'll happen, especially after I'm gone. So I have to trust in something else. And you can trust in other people or organizations, but those things change too. And so there's just nothing that's guaranteed other than your faith. And so the answer is simple is I don't. Like yeah, I have my planning and I have my objectives, and for me personally, like my long-term goal is to build a community of special needs people and professionals in order to research autism and try to not only because people think cure autism, but it's like no, you want to understand autism, you want to understand the situation that had it arise, and then what can we learn from it, and how can everybody be enhanced by that understanding. And so in terms of like material objective is I compound where I can house multiple families and provide research into this situation so that more people can gain. And that's it still kind of rises out of faith because it comes out of like how many people can I help, and that's really my objective most of the time. It actually creates kind of a barrier to trying to earn more because you're like at the end of the day I don't care about money. Like I only care about people. And so and I could help people in so many different ways. I think that's a lot of people limit themselves. Like I can only help people after I'm a millionaire. It's like, no, you can't. What are you talking about? You can help people when you're walking down the street and you see somebody slip. Like, oh, look, I helped somebody. It's so much more immediate. And I think once you learn to live in the moment, then you could get joy out of so many more situations. And prior to my kind of awakening, I really couldn't even remember being happy ever, and now I'm kind of like, no, I can be happy whenever I choose to be. And so I think it's just maturing into, believing what you are. And once you do that, then life gets a lot easier. And so all the challenges and all the things like that just roll off and you just keep on moving forward. But it is all kind of rooted in faith.
I love it. Every answer you gave, and faith is something that my wife and I have discovered lately. My daughter goes to a Catholic school, and very rooted in faith. The women that she's been exposed to are teachers, other mothers of the children there. Yeah, it's one of those things that when you're not worried about public perception, or you're not worried about keeping up with the Joneses, and you keep it in the hands of a higher power, and you kind of let the cards fall as they please. And it's also a situation that when you have a moral authority that you could never meet, it allows you to keep being a good person. It doesn't allow, if you idolize, a celebrity or a political figure or, a business mogul, there's a ceiling to it where it's like, no, there's a measuring stick and that measuring stick is infinite and I'm never going to reach it. And that's Jesus. So it's one of those things where I think that's been huge for us. And I was abrasive to it for a long time, but like you said, when you kind of drop the ego in all things, but especially personally, it changes a lot. It gets a lot off your shoulders, and you can focus on what's important.
Yeah. And that's the name of the game. Now it's not an easy path. And again, I'm 41 and I've only been living that for like a year maybe. And only recently, like in the last couple of weeks, have I been like, oh my gosh, this is the culmination of all of that work. And it's really connecting to guys like you and starting that podcast. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so nice because I get to do what I like doing, which is helping and connecting people. And it is resonating with so many dads. And I'm like, oh, it's a gift. It's a gift from God. And that's the only way to describe it.
Yeah. On behalf of everyone who listens and who have been guests so far and future guests, yeah, appreciate you because those aren't easy discussions to have, but or you're setting the foundation, you're laying the early bricks, and it's gonna yield a lot of fruit in the future. I know that for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a blast and great questions. And now I'm like, I love the opportunity to share stuff because I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so obvious to me now, like what my answer should be. And I used to struggle with this stuff, but the more you open up, the easier it'll be.
Yeah. Well, appreciate it again, Mark. Thanks so much for being a guest on the On Modern podcast. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Unmodern podcast. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also like and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Unmodern Podcast. Do you have suggestions for future guests, or if you're interested in being a guest yourself, please visit unmodernpodcast.com. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next episode.